All right, so here's part 2. So let's review what we learned and looked at in the first video. So I have my least squares regression line, and remember that least squares regression line, hopefully you can see that. Remember that least squares regression line is showing us our predicted values. That's more or less our averages, right? The actual points that are graphed here those are from our data set, right? So we had our set of data and we graphed those particular points. So the points are showing us the actual data values. The least squares regression line here shows us where the predicted values should be. So then these red lines, remember these distances, these vertical distances, these y distances, it's showing how much higher or lower our actual values are compared to our predicted values. Okay, so remember, keep in mind, these values can be positive or they can be negative. So this actual point is well above the predicted line, and that's why in our residual plot, it's showing as a positive value. This point, the way I drew my line, is just below the least squares regression line. In the residual graph, it was pretty far away, right? So for each of these values, if you see these different distances, that's essentially what we are showing in this residual plot. So you can think of this, the x-axis basically is saying, here's what our predicted lines would be. This is where our least squares regression line would be. And these are points that are above the predicted line. And these are values, these are points that would be below the predicted line. So some things to think about. When we are actually looking at a set of data, why we want to look at the residual graph is to decide whether it's a good model of data to represent it as a least squares regression line. So there are some things that we want to consider. So to decide if a set of data is real or relevant or significant, we want two things in particular. And we want that the data is random, and we want that the data is unpredictable. So because of that, we take a look at the residual plot, and we decide whether it is showing something random and unpredictable, or whether it's showing us something not so random. So I want to share some examples of some graphs, some residual graphs that show or represent a pattern that's not so random. So if you take a look, this is from a website that I wanted to share with you all. I'll probably look for the link and share that with you too, so that you can kind of look at that if you would like. But if you notice, here's this random pattern. So that is definitely, that's a residual plot that is telling us it is definitely a linear regression. These, not so much. They're going to be a different shape. So the nice thing is it almost seems a little bit strange, but what we are actually looking for in this residual plot is that we do have some randomness and we do have up and down. Otherwise, it just seems a little bit too fixed. All right, I hope that helps. If you have questions on your project, please let me know.